We want to thank you all for checking it out. Got a lot of folks in the house. The place is standing room only, I would say, and we're just awaiting the start of tonight's event. Yes, we are here at Manning's, 3092 16th Street in the heart of the Mission here. Fine venue for community, food, fun. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, yes, it's very interesting. Nice San Francisco crowd here for a middle of the week. People interested in politics coming out. So it should be interesting. He's a known figure locally for people who follow politics and presumably those in the investor community. But definitely people who follow politics do know who he is. So that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of people out here, even though he's not a politician until, of course, this point where he's about to announce his run for the presidency.
Indeed, and he'll, I guess he's the new Ross Perot.
Yeah, I think that's probably a decent analogy, although, I mean, because Trump was also the new Ross Perot, right? I mean, so there's definitely that tradition. But you're right, though. If you're right, Ross Perot recently passed, did, in fact, run a substantial campaign for president, although it's interesting, it also brings up some of the peculiarities of the American system, because even though Ross Perot gained one of the highest percentages of popular vote of a third-party candidate, I don't believe that he got any electoral votes, or maybe he got one electoral vote. And in fact, a lot of people say that was the reason why Clinton was able to get in, was because he won a plurality. Clinton won a plurality of the popular vote, but he did in fact get a decisive electoral college victory, in the same sense that Trump lost the actual popular vote, but in fact had a substantial and decisive electoral victory.
Indeed. And what do you think in terms of him coming into the Democratic race? Will that dilute? I mean, obviously it's 20 plus candidates now. What do you think? How does he set up with those other candidates, and to get the necessary steps? I think he needs 100-something thousand contributors before he can get into the big time debates.
That's a good question. I can't really say that I've really given it a lot of thought. I mean, my initial impression would be that he's going to have somewhat of a hard time. I would say the advantages for him is that he's got some name recognition in California. He's got some money. I'm assuming he's got some ties to other moneyed liberal interests, so to speak. So I think that's probably a good advantage.
How is everyone doing right now?
Here we go.
How are we feeling over here? We doing okay? Is everyone nice and schwitzy over here in my small business? Good. Are we going to warm up together? Politics is hot, you guys. This is how it feels. Remember this feeling. I just want to thank you all so much for coming to Manny's. Manny's is a civic gathering space on the corner of 16th and Valencia. I want to thank the 35 members of the press that seem to be here with every radio station and TV station there is. It's a lot of cameras, so I made sure to put on my nice shirt today. Normally, I look a little bit... Yeah, I look good, right? Okay. I just want to point out that we have been here for less than 9 months. This is our 15th presidential candidate. And tonight it is Tom Steyer's night at Manny's. So we're looking forward to learning a lot about him. For some of you who don't know him, meeting him. He is the most recently announced presidential candidate. It brings me so much pride to have him here at Manny's. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for spending the next 60 to 90 minutes with us. And with Tom. So with that, let's bring Tom Steyer up to the baby stage.
Okay.
So first, you should know that all these rugs are from my bedroom. I brought them just for you. I wanted to have a nice setup. This is my grapefruit juice. Here we go. Good. So here's how it's going to work, Tom. Oh, no. No, it'll be fun. We're just going to kibitz up here for like 20, 30 minutes. You know what kibitz is, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So we're going to kibitz for 20, 30 minutes, and then, or 45, and then we're going to have some audience questions, and that's it. But first, I just want to see how you're doing. I mean, you announced a week ago, right?
About 9 days.
About 9 days ago. No, who's counting? And how are you feeling right now? How do you feel?
So, for the last 10 years, I've been doing political organizing in California and across the United States. We did over 50 town halls for need to impeach in probably 35 states, including a lot of red states. So what I'm saying to people about this race is, it's an awful lot like what I've been doing, but if you think about it in terms of baseball, the pitches come a little faster and they throw at your head a little more. But it's still, you pick up the bat and try and hit the ball. So honestly, Manny, this is what I want to be doing, and tonight, having a chance to look people in my hometown of San Francisco in the eye, which is a total treat for me.
I just have to say, I'm so honored that you would choose Manny's to have your first public event in San Francisco. You are home right now. We are so honored and excited that you're here and that you're doing this. So first of all, thank you for taking the step, because it takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing.
Well, let me say one other thing. It's not just this is my hometown, but in the front row is my wife, Kat Taylor, here.
Here she is.
And by the way, Catherine has done a ton of work very near here with the Good Samaritan Family Resource Center that she's worked for 30 years, thousands of hours, really for a mission-based family resource center. So that's one thing. Secondly, right next door is my oldest son, Sam, who's 31 years old, and his fiancée, Tessa.
Oh my God, look at that.
This is like a family dinner for us, and they're good friends of Manny. That's what's scary.
Look at your Shayna Punim over there, Sam. So pretty. So 9 days in, this is the first time you've announced your run for president. So this is the first time you're doing this, right? Have you ever run for political office before, or is this the first time?
It's really been since that critical high school student council presidency that this is the next one.
Okay, so I'm just going to get the question out of the way that I think is on a lot of people's minds, which is just why? Like, why are you doing this? Why have you decided to run for president, Tom?
So in January, I said I wasn't going to run for president then because I felt like I needed to continue the need to impeach campaign. We had 6 million signatures. We were still a voice in the wilderness saying that this is the most corrupt president in American history and that he's dangerous to the American people, the Constitution, and the country. So a couple of things have happened since then. One, I think we won the argument. I think everybody in D.C. who's paying attention knows, including all the Republicans, that what we said was true. But the other thing that happened was, since then, in the last 6.5 months, we've had one televised hearing to allow the American people to see the truth. That was Michael Cohen back in February. So what has happened is we were trying to organize the American people, which is what we always try and do, is push the power down to the people, and they've been shut out. The Congress has refused to allow televised hearings. And so I have felt like this was a very straightforward failure of government. And the second thing is this. I feel as if there's a very easy question in front of Americans. Our government has been purchased by corporations. If you go in every one of the issues where you feel like, wow, it seems like a really tough issue, whether it's gun violence, drug pricing, student debt, or climate, you think this is an intractable problem. It's not an intractable problem. There's somebody making a ton of money off it who has control of the conversation and refuses to let the American government solve it. And I thought, look, my family will tell you, I could not sleep thinking that we're going to blow this. I really couldn't sleep. I feel like I have been organizing coalitions of Americans to take on these corporations for the last 10 years. You know, if you guys are from California, the first thing I did was No on 23 in 2010 to take on the oil companies to protect the most progressive energy laws in the world. And nobody thought we could win, and we got 70% of Californians to agree with us. So I've been doing that ever since. You ask why am I doing it? Because we have got to take these people on directly. We have got to take back the democracy, and I believe it's going to take somebody from the outside who's been doing it, who's willing to take them on and can succeed in doing it. And that's the question, not what do we want to do, but how are we going to get anything done in this democracy anymore?
So, but I want to get into your head in that moment. Was there like where were you when you? I hear the logic that went through your head, but where were you when you decided, okay, I'm going to do this, and what was going through your mind?
Well, honestly, what happened was I thought about it again, and I decided not to do it. And I thought, that is the worst decision I have ever made. Because if we go through this and this government doesn't do what I know we need to do, I'm going to feel as if I have missed an opportunity to step up and tell the truth. Just the same way I felt like somebody needed to tell the truth about the president when no one else wanted to. Just the same way I felt like someone needs to take on the oil companies in 2010 because they think they can bully Californians. It's not going to happen. And that's how I feel now. I am more than willing to take this fight on if no one else will, and I don't see anyone else who sees it's a very simple fight. It's hard, but it's not complicated.
And so the thing that you felt was the motivating force and what differentiated you from the over 20 people who, you know, as you I'm sure could admit, have a lot more political experience, some have served in the military, some have crafted legislation, is that you are an outsider, that you're not a part of the political class.
It's not just that many. I mean, we've actually been beating these people consistently in California and around the country. And we've actually built, I don't know if San Franciscans know it, but our organization, Next Gen America, is the largest grassroots organization in the United States. You know, we took on the oil companies in 2010, but we've beaten the tobacco companies. They were 17-0. And in 2016, we got a $2 a pack cigarette tax going directly to Medi-Cal, to low-income people for their health care, partially to pay for all the diseases tobacco products cause. We closed a tax loophole for $1 billion against corporations in 2012, Prop 39, that goes directly to fix up schools and put new books in the hands of kids. Look, I have been fighting these guys for a decade and winning. So you can say I don't have political experience, but actually, this is nothing but politics from the outside. If you look at the 4 leading contenders, they're all senators. They're all combined, they have about 75 years of time in the Congress and Senate. So the real question to ask is, what do we need to do? And if the question is we need to break the back of this corporate control, is that going to come from inside the Beltway or from outside with the American people insisting on it? And my argument has always been, the power's got to go back to the American people. We have to retake the democracy together. It's coming from the outside.
So I'm going to ask a couple questions about particular issues because if you are a sitting senator or a member of Congress, it's people, they have to kind of put out there what their stance on issues are, you know, because they have a voting record. But I'm interested, you know, I know who you are. I've known about you for a while. I know your amazing family. But I actually don't know a lot of where your heart and your mind are on certain issues. So I'm going to start with this morning. This morning I was at Whole Foods on 24th Street buying eggs. And I was listening to the...
Waiting for the issue.
It's coming.
Eggs, Whole Foods.
It's coming. No, it doesn't have to do with Whole Foods or eggs. I was listening to The Daily, and this morning's podcast was about the decision in the Eric Garner case and the fact that Officer Pantaleo was not charged. And I have to say, I got really choked up in the grocery store because they played the audio from what had happened that day. And I have to say, I mean, it really hit my heart. And so my question to you is, do you think Officer Pantaleo should have been charged, 1? And 2, if you are elected president, what are you going to do to ease this clear tension between the police and the public that they are sworn to serve?
So for those of you who haven't been following this case that closely, Eric Garner was choked to death by police in Staten Island. And subsequent to that, I think a lot of people know that fact. But what people don't know is the person who was capturing it on his cell phone was his really good friend, and the police have harassed him ever since. There's been a campaign of police harassment against his companion for capturing the images and insisting on bringing the truth to the American people. So I think this is this is one of the critical incidents about the injustice of the criminal justice system that we've seen. It is something that has been endemic to American policing. And there's no doubt, I mean, for instance, one of the things that we've worked really hard at NextGen in Sacramento, California, under the head of that office, who's a guy named Arnie Soel, is to end the idea of money bail. We have been working systematically on the injustice in criminal justice system to structurally change it here in California, because we understand that this has been a system which has been used in a discriminatory fashion deliberately and across the board, you could say for centuries, but particularly in terms of the explosion of imprisonment that has happened in the United States since 1980. And by the way, as a Californian, you should know in this terrible trend, we've led the way. 3 strikes was really part of the way that nonviolent offenders, specifically in communities of color, were targeted. The treatment of them was disparate from the exact same infractions committed in white communities. And redressing this across the board is something that I think is of paramount importance for everybody who's looking for a justice-based society in America.
Thank you, Tom. So I'm going to go specific, I'm going to go out, I'm going to go specific, I'm going to go out, kind of like a balloon. So the next question is about empathy. I think one of some of the moments from President Obama's campaign that were so powerful was when he talked about an issue that that had personal resonance to him, the shooting of Trayvon Martin and how his son could have been him, and the fact that he did grow up in some parts of his life in poverty. And I want you to talk a little bit about where you think the personal connection to an issue is important in the individual psychology and decision-making of the person who holds the highest office. Because I think the thing that people are already criticizing about you, which I'm sure you know how to hit head on, is what does he know about, being on welfare? What does he know about, what it's like to be homeless? And so how do you see that importance of that personal connection, and how would it inform you if you were president?
So one of the things that I believe is most important is who you actually look in the eye. That if you see someone and have the conversation with them, they're not a statistic anymore. That is something that you now own in your heart. And for the last 10 years, I mean, we, as part of the organizing we're doing as part of NTI, I've traveled around this country and looked people in the eye across the country and talked to them about the issues that they care about. And I'll just give you 2 examples, of which there are hundreds. So for instance, last November, the week before the election, we're organizing in North Carolina. We organize in probably dozens of campuses in North Carolina. We also go door to door. We were gonna do a town hall on need to vote, and we were gonna do a roundtable with 12 of the people who are working on campuses for us. So undergrads, working on campus, organizing there, so young people, we're gonna sit and talk for 20 minutes. Carla Hudson was probably there actually with me. And so I said to the woman next to me, okay, probably a 20-year-old African-American woman going to UNC Greensboro, or maybe to the historically black college next door. And I said, what is the big issue for you? Thinking she would say cost of college, racial justice, climate, or healthcare, because those are the 4 issues that we normally hear the most from college kids. And we've done it hundreds of times. She said, food security, sex trafficking. I said, okay, so this is a 20-year-old college student. I said, food security, are you talking about a food desert? That there are no good, grocery stores in your neighborhood? She said, no, we're hungry. We're hungry. We don't have enough food to eat. And I checked the next day, actually, at the local food bank. I went over to see 19% of the people around Greensboro, North Carolina, 1 out of 5 people for 32 counties around Greensboro are hungry. So she was telling me something that I didn't know right then. And I said, sex trafficking. I've worked with some people who represent women who've been trafficked, so I have at least some understanding of what you're talking about, but why is that an issue for you? And she said, oh, because the young people are being trafficked for food or a place to sleep. So you can't, unless you hear that directly, you don't own it. And on last Thursday, I was in Denmark, South Carolina, visiting a group of people who are fighting against a bad water system. It's polluted, they're getting sick, and they're dying. They're overwhelmingly African American, and the Republican white legislature refuses to put in a water treatment facility that would make them well. It's just like Flint. I was at the house, we were gathering at the house of one of the people, of the leaders of this movement, a woman named Deanna Berry. She also has, in addition to leading this fight, her husband is dying, his kidneys are failing. She has a 16-year-old daughter with Downs who's also dying from another thing, and she asked me, Tom, on the 31st of July, I can do one of two things. I can take my daughter to the doctor, or I can pay the rent. What do you think I'm gonna do? And I said, Deanna, you're taking your daughter to the doctor. And she said, of course I am, but I don't know where I'm gonna be sleeping on the 1st of August. So in answer to your question, it's incumbent, if you want to understand the United States of America, to get out of your comfort zone and whatever your experience is, which I have been doing for 10 years, to look people in the eye, to understand what it means to live in the mission, to understand that, you know, what it means as people are driven out of the mission, where they have to move to South San Francisco or live in their cars. Unless you're talking to those people directly, unless you're meeting them, they're a statistic and you're not going to give enough weight to their reality. And if you want to represent this country, you better be out there looking them in the eye and understanding both the challenges and how wonderful the people are. Deanna Berry was incredibly upbeat. She was incredibly optimistic. She was doing a fantastic job. Americans are great. They're just great. So whatever the challenges are, we are up to them. And that's another thing you only get by going around the country and listening to how tough people are, how compassionate they are, how brave they are.
Thank you for that, Tom. That was very powerful. I don't know if you guys can see it from back there, but he's getting, you clearly care a lot about this. So my family voted for Donald Trump, and my sister, yeah, and I worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign. And my older sister runs a food pantry in Rochester, and so she hears stories of... Rochester, New York. Yes. And she hears these stories firsthand. She's on the front lines. She's meeting people who have to choose between the heat in the winter in Rochester or, you know, diapers for their babies. So she sees it as well. And I think one of the things that Donald Trump actually did really effectively was to convince people who did not have very much that he would help them, that he, in his ability to make billions himself, he's hired a lot of people. He's going to be able to help that woman in Greensboro. And you are a billionaire. You're the only billionaire running in this race right now. And so, what is your plan? How are you gonna help people?
So let me start with a couple points before I answer that question, which is, Donald Trump is a fraud. He didn't make his money. He inherited his money. He has a string of bankruptcies behind him. He inherited his money from his very, very rich dad, and he's a big-time tax cheat. That's actually who this guy is. But let me make another point. If we do two things, then we can afford to provide a level of security and a level of justice in this society that is unparalleled in the history of the world. We need to break the back of these corporations' stranglehold on our democracy. We really do. Because if you look since 1980, they have gotten everything their way, and working people have gotten nothing. So if you don't believe that they control it, I think the stock exchange, the S&P 500, is up 28 times. If you put in $1, you've got 28 bucks. Working people have not had a raise in that time. If you're wondering if they control the rules, look at the outcome. They control the rules. And we also do need to stabilize this climate, because if you follow it, it's an emergency. and it could overwhelm us. But we have the ability to do it. We can do it. We have to choose to do it, and we have to beat the oil companies who'd rather make 10 more years of tens of billions of dollars or hundreds of billions of dollars of profit and screw the rest of us and screw the whole world. But if we do those things, then we have more than enough money to make healthcare a right in this society for every single American. We do. We have more than enough money to provide quality public education, pre-K through college, with ongoing skills training. We have more than enough money to provide a living wage for Americans. And we have more than enough money to stop people from polluting and killing us, to provide a right to clean air and clean water. This is not a question of whether we have the money. It is not a question of whether we have the technology. We have more than enough money, but it's being allocated in a completely unjust and unfair way. And so in order to change that, we have got to take back the democracy. But in terms of whether we can afford it, look at all the other advanced countries in the world. They can afford it, and they're poorer than us. They have a lower income per person. It's just the way the income is distributed is so shockingly unfair that everybody thinks there's not enough money. And what Donald Trump says is, there isn't enough money, and every time somebody who doesn't look like you, who is African American or Latino or Asian or any of the things that he is specifically bigoted about, that somehow their success is coming out of your pocket. That is a completely false statement. If you think about how the United States is going to progress, it is going to be together. And we should celebrate the success of people in other parts of the country, and specifically people who do not look exactly like us, however we look. Because if a kid in Compton is successful, that is good for every single person in the United States. And if a kid in Appalachia is successful, that is good for every single person in the United States. Since when do we root against our fellow Americans? If you think about what we should be trying to do, we should be investing in ourselves so we're successful. We are the United States. Our success is the success of the United States broadly. I'm an investor. We should be investing in our kids. That's called education. We should be investing in health for everybody in this society. If you think about how you succeed by cooperating and creating things together, not by fighting. No one has ever created something beautiful in a fistfight. And Mr. Trump, that's all he knows, is confrontation, bigotry, and the idea that somehow he's going to win at the expense of everyone else. That has never happened, and it's never going to happen. The way we've always succeeded is by helping each other, investing each other, and succeeding and failing together. So why don't we just succeed together?
So if I understand you correctly, it's about reallocating the money in a more just way. But all that money that the government is taking in and that the country is making, it's the fact that the problem is that's not being parsed out to society properly.
Well, look, let's talk for 1 second about one of the big issues, which is the so-called healthcare crisis. The healthcare crisis is a healthcare cost crisis and a healthcare availability crisis. We have the problem that our healthcare costs twice as much as any other advanced country in the world. And why would that be true? Because the healthcare providing corporations own our elected officials. We pay much more, twice as much for the exact same drugs as Canadians pay. And it's against the law to go to Canada to buy the drugs. They own the system. They write the rules for themselves. If you look, it is incredible. If you go and listen to why people make the decisions, they have lobbyists in their offices every single day from these corporations. The corporations have the right to give unlimited money in independent expenditures because they're treated as American citizens. Look, if we're going to beat these people, I mean, we've put forward changes, structural changes. We need a big win in November of 2020 across the board. But we need structural changes. I mean, we've said we want a national referendum the way California has propositions. Because if the Congress isn't going to work the way sometimes Sacramento doesn't work, we want to be able to go to the people and get the answer there. We've pushed for term limits in Congress, 12 years, period. So you're not sitting there trying to figure out how to keep your career going. You're just trying to get something done. Change the incentives. And we've pushed all the stuff in terms of easy access to voting, which in California we're used to, would be a revolution in a lot of this country that's controlled by Republicans. And lastly, we want to get rid of the idea that corporations are people. This whole idea legally hangs on the obvious falsehood that corporations are people. I mean, think about it just for 1 sec. Corporations are not people. They don't have kids. They don't have hearts and souls. They really don't. They're totally focused on their bottom line. So it's not that they should not have the right that every human being has, because they're not a human being. And if we got rid of that, that would be a gigantic step forward in limiting their use of money for political purposes, which we definitely need to do.
Okay. Here, I'll show you. Oh, you got it. There you go. You could have a job here if you want. We're hiring.
I want a living wage, Manny.
Okay. How do you know I don't pay a living wage? Who told you that? Are you talking to my staff? It's hard to pay. You know what a living wage is in San Francisco? It's very, very high. Oh, now I lost my train of thought. Thank you, Luke. Okay, right. What are you saying to the question of it's time for a young president, it's time for a president of color, it's time for a woman? You, if you get to the debate stage, you will be standing on a stage with folks who, don't look like you. And what are you saying to that question? It's time for someone that doesn't look like Tom Steyer to be our president.
Look, I think the question here is about vision. The question for us is going to be, what is the vision that Americans can support and rally around? Because that's actually, I mean, I think people want to run against Donald Trump and his racism. They want to run against Donald Trump and his criminality. They want to run against Donald Trump and all of his horrible character defects. But that actually isn't the point. The question, as far as I'm concerned, is not what does Donald Trump stand for? What do we stand for? And that is actually what is incumbent on every single person who's running, which is this. What are we going to do? It's not so much what are our goals and the nuances of healthcare or the nuances of your version of the Green New Deal. The question for Americans is, how are we going to get any of that stuff? It's how, not what. And really, what we need in 2020 is an across-the-board win with a gigantic change, rebuild the electorate. And that is actually what we're trying to do. This is a question of what is the vision to organize Americans around to get a generational change election built on a completely different turnout and to convince the people in the United States who think this government doesn't work, who think it's been bought by corporations, that we can retake the democracy and make it work for the people of the United States. That is the question, and believe me, that the number one political fact in the United States, the thing that is behind Mr. Trump, is that 8 out of 10 Americans think this democracy has been purchased. That everything we learned in 4th grade about how great it is of by and for the people, 8 out of 10 Americans think is baloney. They think it's been purchased, they think they're being disrespected, and that elected officials don't put them first. And I'm in the 8 out of 10. That is the question in front of us, is how do we retake the democracy? And frankly, in terms of climate, it's a perfect example of oil companies getting their way regardless of how much of an emergency it is. There's no argument about whether we're right about climate. There's no scientific other side. There's no argument about whether it isn't going to be cheaper to do renewables. There's no argument about whether it won't create millions of net jobs and they can be good paying jobs, or that it'll make us healthier. They don't even make the argument. It's just like, we're going to get our way. That is the question in front of Americans, is how are we going to retake this country from the people who are running it for themselves, who own and run corporations? That is the question, Manny. And unless we address that, this is just a very nice conversation in a college about, poli-sci 301.
I never took 301. I didn't get that far. Okay, so let's talk strategy for a second. I want to know, so it's not actually that late. A lot of people are like, oh, Tom, he's in so late. Why did he wait so long? At this time in 2007, Barack Obama was still relatively unknown. He was not surging in the polls. We still have a year until the convention. So we actually have a lot of time. But I want to know what you think your strategy is to win this. Because some of the people who are running have been running for a bit already. They've raised substantial amounts of money from donors, which they could utilize for turnout. So yeah, how do you feel like you're going to win? What's your strategy to get the nomination?
Look, we're really simple. We're a grassroots organization. We're either going to tell a truth that people respond to and go door to door and look people in the eye, or we're not. And if I'm not saying something that is actually what people need to hear, then it won't work. But I've spent 10 years trying to figure out and peel the onion about why we're in this trouble. And I've thought about it very hard, and I've talked to somewhere between tens of thousands of people. And I really believe that what I'm talking about is what we're dealing with, and it's a generational challenge. And so for me, I'm going to go out and try to tell the truth in an unvarnished way. No, I know everybody always describes me as being rich. That isn't how I see myself. But I can tell you this. The one thing it does give me is the right to say nobody owns me. I mean, I will do exactly what I think is right, and I will tell the truth exactly the way I see it.
I like you, Tom.
You're just saying that because you're friends with my son.
I like you even though even in addition to being friends with your son. Okay, I'm going to ask some quick questions, okay? All right. What's your favorite swing state? Just quick, whatever comes to your mind,
Wow. We're in 11 swing states. And I'll tell you the one that has been the most successful in terms of change, and that's Nevada. What we've seen in Nevada, a traditionally extremely conservative state. Katz family's been going there since the 30s to the Nevada side of Tahoe. Nevada now is got two Democratic senators, a Democratic governor. We control both houses of the legislature, partly because an enormous amount of work going door to door that we participated in every way we could, including being on all the campuses and going door to door with the unions, but also because Nevada has had a huge demographic change, and there's been a huge influx of Latinos. And so it's a state where we have seen what we've seen in California too, that a majority-minority state is not just the future of the United States, but it's the glowing future of the United States. It's the positive future of the United States. And so when I think about Nevada, there are other states where we've had real success, but that's one where, you asked me and I had never asked myself that question, but I feel great about what's going on there, and I feel great about what's going to happen to healthcare, and I feel great that we're going to get rid of it. It's a right-to-work state, if you can believe it. I feel they had a $7.50 minimum wage in Nevada. I feel great about whether the people of Nevada are going to have representatives fighting for them at every level, and that's all we're really looking for. And I'll tell you a story why I love it. I went to the biggest public hospital in Las Vegas, and I was having lunch with probably 20 people, union workers, so cleaning staff, orderlies, nurses, no docs, but everybody else. And I said to them, do you guys like your jobs? They're like, we love our jobs. And I said, is that because you're unionized and have good wages and benefits? And they go, no, we save lives. This hospital saves lives. So here are these people. And I did one shift of cleaning this hospital one of the people who work there, and it's a very, very tough job. If you think about what you're cleaning up in a hospital, it's a lot. And I then ask them, who fights for you? Who represents you? When you think in your head, who's fighting for you? Who is it? And they go, nobody. And they're like, come on. Maybe not in D.C., but what about in Carson City, which is the capital? And they're like, no, there is nobody fighting for us. So they couldn't have more sympathetic people. I mean, these people are working really hard at some very tough jobs because they believe they're saving lives. And they believe there's nobody representing them in the public sector. That sucks. That is not right. And so that's why we're working so that people like that who are doing a great job for the best reasons feel like there's somebody out there who gets up in the morning with them in mind and does it all day and then does it the next day. That's why I like Nevada.
That was a really good answer.
Manny!
That was a great answer, Tom.
Don't sound so surprised, baby.
It was a hard question. We answered it so well. Which candidate would you say you are most like, and which candidate would you say you are most different from?
Look, I honestly think that the way that I'm different in this is I'm the person who has actually been organizing from the outside for a long time. The candidate who I am most unlike, though, is Donald Trump.
Wait a second.
He is the most
addendum.
Is he not? Wait a second, Manny.
No.
Let me ask Manny a question. Is he not a candidate? I thought he was running.
No, he doesn't count on the Democratic side. I asked the questions up here.
Look, I look at that group of people running, and I know that they are smart, and they're talking about important things, and they've put in a lot of time, and their policy ideas are good. The question to me is honestly going to be, who is going to deal practically with how we get any of that stuff? And who is going to make climate an emergency on day one? Because those are the two things which we absolutely have to do. And if we do those two things, honestly, if you just stop for 1 second, I always ask people to stop and think, if we had those two things, how you'd feel. If we really were asking ourselves, what is the best healthcare system for Americans, not what is the best healthcare system for the drug companies and the HMOs and the hospitals and the other organizations that are making money off us. That's a really different question. If we asked, what is the best way to educate our young people, not how are the banks going to make money off student loans, how are the servicers going to make money off student loans? And if we asked, how are we going to end gun violence in the United States, not how are gun manufacturers going to make the most money by selling guns to people across this society, even if they are certifiably insane? Those are completely different questions, but if we ask those questions, we have the money to answer those questions in a just way for every American. And imagine how great that would feel if that was the question that was being asked, and all we're arguing is how to do that best, as if this democracy was of, by, and for the people. Imagine how good we'd feel, because we live in Northern California. We all know that there's technology coming down the pike that's amazing, that there's healthcare breakthroughs, that if they're available to every American are amazing. We know they're amazing.
Okay, so I only have a couple more questions, okay, Tom? Yep. And then we're going to get to the audience.
The fun thing in life for me is human connection. I mean, my wife's sitting here, my son's sitting here, his fiancee's sitting here. There are a bunch of people here who I work with. Honestly, having dinner with Deanna Barry in Denmark, South Carolina, and understanding how great she is incredibly fun for me. To understand what people do. You know, Kat has done all this work at Good Samaritan. She also runs a community bank that's mission-driven for economic justice, environmental sustainability, and to support women and minority-owned businesses. Meeting people, looking them in the eye, and understanding not just that they have needs, but that they have hearts and souls that are so good, that is a joy. And the more you see it, the more of a joy it is. That's really the thing that I enjoy by far the most. And that's why, you know, someone's asking me, are you looking forward to tonight? And I was like, are you kidding me? Talking to a bunch of people from my hometown, that's just like the biggest treat in the world for me. Really. But I feel the same way going across this country. It is so interesting. It is so exciting. It is so reassuring to understand how good people can be.
Okay, so that's the good part. That's amazing. And you have an amazing frickin' family, too, which helps. What keeps you up at night?
Look, I think we're in this situation that's kind of, I want to use a poker analogy, and I'll excuse that for everybody who doesn't play cards. But there's an old cliche, which is the chips are down. And that means that you've taken everything you have and pushed it into the middle of the table. So you can win everything and you can lose everything. And that's what I think this election is. As far as I'm concerned, all the chips are in. And so if we win the kind of across-the-board victory that I think we will win, then I think we get everything. We'll do the two things I said. We will create something that's better than anybody has ever had in history. And if we lose, then we are in really a rough spot. But the difference between this and poker is we're not just going to turn over a card, and we can't control that. We can control what we do. We can control what the card is that we turn over by how hard we work, whether we organize, whether we show up, in fact, who ends up going to the polls in November of 2020. So I look at this as we're all in. Honestly, that's why I'm sitting here. That's why I'm asking you guys to support me. I want everybody to give me $1 so I can get on the stage. But as far as I'm concerned, we should be all in. Because if this works, then we're going to really make a change. And if it doesn't work, God forbid if Donald Trump got reelected, or if, in fact, we don't flip the Senate, if we don't have a across-the-board generational change election, we're in a tough spot. And that's exactly how I view this. That's really why I'm running. I feel like do or die.
Okay, I just have 2 more questions. Okay, Tom Steyer? That's it. So Governor Inslee and Governor Hickenlooper have made climate. See what I did for you? Look at that. That's how much I love you. Governor Hickenlooper and Governor Inslee have made climate a major part of their campaign, and you have as well. And I think when people think about you, they do think about, and Next Gen, they do think about climate activism in the environment. So I'll tell you, it's been one of the harder event series for us here at Manny's. We had Michael.
Did they both come here, Manny? I'm not sure who the
yes,
15 are. Okay.
Yeah, they did.
Okay.
Of course they did. But we've done a bunch of climate and environmental programming here, and I have to tell you, it's been tough. People kind of don't show up as much as you'd think they would, and I think it's a tough issue to actually get a lot of people to really care enough to do something about it, especially on the other side of the aisle. So my question for you is, how are you going to get, on day one you said a climate emergency, but how are you going to get the country to really take this seriously and Republican members of Congress to actually legislate on it?
So I want to make 2 points. One is about how to talk about climate and how to think about climate, and the other is what we should do on day one. Look, in 2010, when we were running No on 23 against these oil companies, we had a completely different vision of what we were trying to do and a completely different coalition. We said we are going to organize around the people of California, not around the policy wonks and the environmental community. Because people don't even understand who cares about this. Number one group in California who cares about pollution, energy, climate, Latinos. Number 2 group, African Americans. Number 3 group, Asian Americans. So when we talk about climate, we talk about first environmental justice, about what is this going to mean for the communities where pollution is an absolutely daily issue for them and their families, where basically we have put pollution into poor communities and communities of color because corporations can get away with it. So that's the first thing, is we start with environmental justice. We talk about jobs all the time Because actually, if we rebuild this country, which we have to do, we're going to create millions of net jobs, and they're going to be high-wage, unionized jobs. Think about what we'd have to do. A lot of electricians, a lot of laborers. We'd have to rebuild the grid, but we'd have to rebuild tons of stuff. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, there is this sense that somehow clean energy is more expensive. That, unfortunately, is not true. They keep saying that, but if you go and look about what it costs to create wind energy or solar energy as opposed to fossil fuel energy, we're crushing them and will continue to crush them forever. And think about it as a Northern Californian. People outside of California don't always understand that technology gets better every year. Stronger, more powerful, cheaper. When I asked the Obama administration what they saw as the decline curve for the cost of renewable energy, they said, we keep it flat going forward. I said, it goes down every single year, and it will go down every single year. So for you to keep it flat is not conservative, it's inaccurate. What we're seeing, for all the people who've been involved in the information technology industry here, think about what a computer looked like in 1970 and think about your cell phone and know the cell phone is infinitely stronger than a room full of computers in 1970. That's true about clean energy too. So this is a different story built around different people, but we start with justice because you get a better policy if you take into consideration human beings, and specifically human beings who've been picked on and whose communities have borne the brunt of pollution now for decades or centuries.
Okay, my last question to you, and then we're going to go to audience questions. So this morning I was watching the Squad's press conference, and I'm not going to make you wade into the whole thing that's going on with them, but Ayanna Pressley opened up the press conference and she referenced the occupant of the White House, and she said that she doesn't call him the president, she calls him the occupant of the White House because he does not exude, and he's not giving enough respect to the actual office of the president to call him that, because he's not representing what that office should hold. And so my question to you is, if you win, how are you going to restore our faith in the presidency after 4 years of this nincompoop just degrading this office that, sure, the legislation is crap, sure, all the people who are being deported, their lives have been torn asunder, but even longer term than that, all the young people, myself included, who've seen this office just get corroded over this man's 4 years, how are you going to restore our moral authority in that office?
Look, the reason I agree with Congresswoman Pressley is because obviously he doesn't think he's her president either. He thinks he's only the president for the people who vote for him, and that's who he represents, not the rest of us. And for everybody in California, you've got to know that he runs his policies to give us pain across the board. His tax cut was specifically aimed at hurting people in California and New York and New Jersey and Massachusetts. This is not a guy who thinks he's our president, and he specifically never tries to help us. In fact, he tries to do the opposite. But I think the question about restoring dignity, it's funny. When Kat and I, when our kids were little, one of the things that I learned really early was they never really listened to what we had to say. We could talk until we're blue in the face. That wasn't really what they paid attention to. But they watched what we did like hawks. I don't even know if they knew they were doing it. And I realized as I watched them that I'd done it with my parents. That the standard that they'd given about what's right and wrong, about doing the right thing, not talking about the right thing, was what I picked up. I watched them lead a life where they chose to do the right thing. And hopefully that's what our kids saw in us. But so in terms of restoring dignity, you don't restore dignity by saying I'm dignified. You don't restore dignity by being well-dressed or putting on airs. You restore dignity by doing the right thing. It's not talking the talk. So You know, I think by the time a president has lied 11,000 times, and I think that's the Washington Post count, I'm within 1,000. By the time honestly, you guys, one of the things that blew my mind was, I think 3 weeks ago, a very credible woman said that he'd raped her, and it wasn't even a story. Literally, I said, the amazing thing about this is, this isn't going to be a 24-hour story. And you think about how far we've fallen, that is not considered newsworthy because it's going to be eclipsed by something worse so soon. And in the context of what he's done, it's really kind of par for the course. I hate to say that. So when you talk about restoring dignity, it's about doing the right thing and treating people with dignity, not about your dignity, but giving dignity to other people. And I think that's got to happen in this country, because we are the indispensable country. This is the richest country in the world. We were formed for a purpose, to try and talk about freedom and justice. If this world is going to organize around climate, if this world is going to organize around peace and justice, it's not like we're the only leader, but we have to be part of it, and we have to be one of the leaders, and we have to stand for morality and ethics. That's what this country has done. So if we don't do that, we will be giving up really our birthright, and it would be very disappointing.
Thank you, Tom. Kat, do you mind coming up here, please? So Kat is our general manager, and she is going to be handing out the Q&A mic. Oh, we have another Kat.
It's a good name, you know?
Okay, so who would like to ask the first question? Oh, yeah, right over here.
I like the colored shirt.
Oh, thank you.
If you guys don't mind just saying your name so that we can address you.
So, Tom, this is a picture of me with you from 4 years ago, where I told you, my name's Peter Gisela, I'm a Vietnam Era veteran, and I told you about 40 years ago there was a bill in the Congress where I proposed a Youth Energy Corps as part of the bill to deal with a future war in the Persian Gulf and climate change, and gave you documents on it. Part of that bill also proposed having youth between their 17th and 18th birthday talk about civic values, civic obligations, and consider doing some kind of nonprofit work, AmeriCorps, or military service.
Peter, I'm going to ask you, we have a lot of people that want to ask questions, so let's just get straight to the question.
2 questions. There's a federal commission looking into this idea now, and they're aware strongly of this idea, but you've indicated to me that you're not willing to talk about this idea of challenging youth in a very cheap manner to think between 7 to 18 about engaging in service. And I've been on Twitter.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, and just...
Real quick, Peter, what's your second question?
One question first.
Feedback is the other question. No feedback to me.
So let me say this. Peter asked me earlier, are we going to do this? And what I said was, we're not prepared to say exactly what we're going to do, because we want to roll it out as part of a broader, message in the coming week or two. But the idea of participation in our society by young people for common goals that would be good, and including the idea of service, is one that we entirely embrace. And I think you're going to feel as if we listen to you.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Next question over here with the yellow hat. Or green. I can't tell.
It's light yellow, actually. My name's Evan. I run an organization called Climate Careers. And in exploring this in the early days, I was trying to figure out, how can I align my career with solving climate change? And I discovered that there's an amazing breadth of different opportunities for people to do so. But I think that this is something that's a missed opportunity right now. There's a lot of talk around green jobs, but people aren't getting specific about what those jobs are. How do you plan to communicate to people who are perhaps undecided to pull them in to get your vote as someone who's championing solving climate change?
So one of the ways that I think about climate, and I think the Green New Deal does this really well, by the way. So for all you guys, not many people have actually read the Green New Deal. It's very sensible. It's being described by Fox News as if it were, an extremist point. But the big point about the Green New Deal is climate is not some siloed issue that doesn't touch other issues. It's actually an issue that goes across society. And so it's going to impact so many different things. So when we think about what is a clean energy business, it's actually going to touch so many businesses, not just energy generation. People tend to think in terms of renewable energy, solar, wind, and of course that's part of it. But I think there's going to be real change across the board in the way that we do business. Plus, we're going to have to rebuild this country. We're going to have to rebuild it in a smart way so we'll have a sustainable world. So for instance, one of the things that Kat Taylor does is she works really hard on sustainable agriculture. We're going to have to do agriculture in a different way so that we can have a natural world that sustains us going forward. So Evan, when I think about what is a clean job, it's going to touch everything. And the question is going to be, as a society, do we choose to make that choice structurally together? Because if we do, there are going to be millions of specific jobs about rebuilding this country. But for instance, we're going to do manufacturing completely differently. You know, the people who run technology companies, which they've been doing, are going to insist that their energy be clean and that there's, you know, every industry is going to have to change. This is going to be an across-the-board move. And so it's, you know, I remember talking to somebody in 1996 about the internet. And I said, well, what about these internet companies? And he goes, Tom, if a company turns on its lights in the morning, do you call it an electricity company? There's no such thing as an internet company. There are people who use the internet to provide services for Americans much cheaper and better. That doesn't make that, they're a service company using technology in a new way. And actually, as you've seen, every company now uses the internet to provide services in a cheaper, better, more comprehensive and faster way. That's what we're talking about here, that we're having a new approach to everything, and everybody's going to have to change their attitude and do this together, but it's going to touch very deeply the way we do business, the way we live, and our future. And all of it is going to be good.
All right. Is it Philip? Yeah. Next question is Philip over here.
Hi. First, my name is Philip Dupree. I live here in San Francisco.
Do you mind speaking directly into the mic?
My name is Philip Dupree. I live here in San Francisco. The first thing I wanted to say was it's awesome the work you've done around climate. I really appreciate that. What I wanted to ask was about
right into the mic, Philip.
What I wanted to ask was about people talking a lot about the concept of billionaires. You've got people like Piketty and Anand Giridharadas and even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just saying that the very existence of billionaires might be a problem. And while I think it's awesome that people like you have used your wealth in a noble fashion, the more I read, the more I think that just the idea that the amount of wealth can be concentrated in an individual such as yourself might be the cause of a lot of the problems you're trying to solve. So my question to you is this. Do you think that your personal wealth is problematic? Why or why not? Thank you.
So I think that's a fair question. So Philip, let me say this. I think it must have been 12 years ago, Kat and I took the Giving Pledge to say we're going to give the bulk of our money away during our lifetime to good causes. I think that what is unjust in our society is in general the way that the profits and the income of this society are distributed generally. I don't believe we should put a ceiling on how much somebody can make because Americans have always felt like, you know, the sky's the limit. Do I think that this kind of concentration of income and wealth is healthy? Absolutely not. But to me, we need a structural answer to this by taking away the corporate. All this wealth accumulation is based on the people who own and run corporations creaming the bottom line for themselves and viewing everybody else as a cost. And that's what we need to change. And I think we need to change the taxes. But what I don't think we should do is say to people, you know, there's a ceiling on how far you can go in America. I think in America, people like to feel like the sky's the limit. What we can't have is this kind of structural injustice. What we can't have is no raise for 80% of Americans for 40 years. And we can't have laws that absolutely work against the vast bulk of Americans to the benefit of only the top. But it's really based on structure. You know, there was a real change in 1980 when Reagan came in. They have worked consistently and really successfully to pass laws to take away the power from working people. And if you look since 1980, the relationship between the people who run corporations and the average worker, that relationship has changed from something like 30 to 1 to 300 to 1. It's exactly wrong. It's structural. It's built into our society and the rules with things like right to work, by going after unions, but also by a real change in the way that corporations think about working people. So to me, the question here is, how does everybody rise? And the way that this money has been creamed by the top people is absolutely unfair. I agree with you. And so it's incumbent on us to address that specifically, because if we redress that specifically, that's how we're going to be able to afford all the things I'm talking about as rights for every American: healthcare, education, living wage, clean air, clean water.
Can we hand the mic to that woman right over there in front of Luke? Thank you. Yep, you. And I'm just going to assume genders, everyone. I'm sorry.
Okay. My name is Helen, and my question is, Tom, what motivated you to get into political activism 10 years ago?
All right. Can we have a mic back this way? Or Luke, you can keep the mic right there.
Well, I mean, specifically what drew me was the failure of this society to address climate, because I felt as if it's going to affect every single American. It could be devastating for every single American, and it would be more devastating for low-income communities and communities of color. And I felt like, okay, here it is. This is a gigantic challenge for our society. I want to be on the right side of this. But I think more than that, if you knew my parents, or if you knew my family now, you'd realize my mom was a journalist who became a teacher who worked in New York City public schools and the Brooklyn House of Detention. My father took a break from his law career to be in the Navy in World War II and prosecuted Nazis at Nuremberg. They really believed you're on the earth to do what's right, to push for what's right. And if you ever meet Kat Taylor, she has been pushing for what's right since she was protesting apartheid in college. So to me, the idea that part of having a meaningful life as a citizen is based on pushing for what's right is something that I feel is, it's kind of, I think everybody in America has that obligation to the society, because so many people have done that for us. That people and they've done, people have sacrificed everything for freedom and justice in this country. And you think about the civil rights movement, that was a movement where people were taking gigantic risks, and some people paid gigantic prices to do what was right. And so to me, that is the American tradition. That is the proudest American tradition. And so that's the tradition I want to be in. I want to feel like I'm on the side of the angels. And I think everybody in this room should feel the same way. If you want to have a meaningful life, let's be on the side of the angels. And that's what I'm trying to do.
All right. We have time for 2 more questions. Luke, this gentleman standing next to the camera right here.
Hi, Tom. My name is Amaya. First of all, I'd like to thank you for sharing your time today and thoughts on a number of issues. So diving into the question, it seems that a large part of why you're running for president is a lack of action or spine, shown by a number of people on issues such as climate change or holding this president accountable. So this lack of action is unfortunately coming not just from Republicans, but also some Democratic leaders, including Nancy Pelosi, who has essentially taken impeachment investigations off the table and been generally dismissive of efforts such as the Green New Deal. So my question to you is, instead of entering a crowded presidential field, why not start here at home in San Francisco and maybe take on members of Congress and push them to be bolder.
So, first of all, let me say this. Speaker Pelosi has been our congressperson for decades, and we voted for her every single time. I have never questioned whether she was trying to represent honestly the people of San Francisco or the people of the United States of America. I have disagreed with her openly about impeachment, but I have never questioned her motives on this. We have a very specific disagreement that has led to us coming out differently on some issues, and I'll explain that disagreement, and I think it is a disagreement within the Democratic Party more generally, and I think it explains part of what's going on for me, but also for those 4 young congresswomen of color who have been in the news so much this week. I believe that the way that we're going to win this election in 2020, and I believe the way we won the election in 2018, because I'm a grassroots person, is by changing the electorate. Somewhere between 40 and 60% of Americans don't vote because they don't believe the system works. And I believe that the way that we take back the democracy is going to those people. They agree with us on the issues. They're inherently democratic. We organize them. We talk truth to them. We inspire and communicate with them. They show up. We win everything. That's what I believe. And in 2018, that's what happened. If you look at 2018, Democratic voters from the 4 years before in the midterm election were up by 2/3. It literally went up 2/3 more than in 2014. And in terms of young people in the districts we're in, it more than doubled. That's how we won in 18. That's how we believe we will win a generation-changing election in 2020, by changing who votes, by changing the electorate. That's what we believe is happening in California. The more moderate members of the Democratic Party share our values. They do. They believe that the way that we're going to win in 2020 is by convincing moderate independents and moderate Republicans that is maybe 1 or 2%, that we're pretty reasonable, that we can be trusted, that we're not too progressive, and that's how we're going to win the election in 2020. I look at it and I go, my God, we've got 40 or 50% of people who already agree with us. We don't need to convince them we're right. We need to convince them that it matters. Let's go do that, as opposed to try and come down as, somehow less than we really are to the 2% of people in America who haven't decided whether they like Donald Trump or us. Why not go to the 50% of Americans who already agree with us and get them to understand that if we show up together, we win everything? That's actually what we've been trying to do. That's why we're grassroots people. That's what we believe the future is. That's the democratic revolution that takes back this country from the corporations.
Luke, who has the mic right now? I'm taking a lot of people. Goodness gracious, this is hard. You have the mic, Kat? Yeah. That lady standing next to Zach, you get the last question. Yeah, you with your hand up. And then, guys, if you have a burning question, don't worry. Tom has some time after this. You can come in and meet him yourself. Thanks, Tom.
I have to do whatever Manny says from here on out.
I like that. All right, you get the last question.
Hi, Tom. My name's Happy. Thanks a lot for coming tonight. My question to you is that, you have done a lot of great work in climate change, immigration, to advance causes that you believe in with the wealth that you have accumulated by donating to campaigns. Why do you think being the president itself would be something that you think you're better at in terms of, advancing these causes compared to just donating money or this grassroots activism that you've already been doing?
Look, the thing that I believe is that we're going to have to be straightforward and aggressive politically. The thing that I'm worried about, the reason I couldn't stay out of this, because I felt like we really are at a turning point, and this actually is the time for us to change the narrative. And if you think about what a president does, what a really successful president does, and just imagine in your own mind whoever you think is a successful president. More than that, think about who you think is a successful world leader in your mind. And I'll give you an example of somebody who most people think is a really successful world leader in the last 40 years. Nelson Mandela. What did Nelson Mandela do? He changed the way that South Africans think about themselves and their relationship to the government and their relationship to each other. He changed the narrative for everybody about South Africa. And the last American president to do that, in a way that I profoundly disagree with, is Ronald Reagan, who convinced Americans that government is bad, that corporations are efficient and fair, that the free market really works, that we should not invest in each other, that in fact we should starve government, not support people in the United States, but let the corporations get everything and it will trickle down. We know it hasn't trickled down. We know it's never going to trickle down. He sold a false narrative that included every single one of the lies that Donald Trump tells about pollution, about guns, about God, about choice, about suppressing the vote of African American communities. We were sold a bill of goods by a great salesman. But what we need now is a different narrative about who we are and what we're trying to create and how we're going to do it. And that is actually the point here. It's not about this policy nuance or that policy nuance. The question for Americans is somebody working in that hospital, that public hospital in Las Vegas, on the cleaning staff, going to believe that Washington now represents them, that this country has a future that makes sense for them and their families, and that we're creating something great again? That is the question for America. Because if you look at this society, there is a lot of talk about policy, and there's a lot of talk about money. And you'd think that everything in this society was about money and services. But really, people have to have a reason to get up in the morning and an understanding of why their lives make sense and what we're trying to do. And Americans traditionally have had that. We've been optimistic and bold and brave, and we've led the world. And honestly, it's missing. You can't look at a society where suicide and opioid addiction is going up a ton and think that's a healthy spiritual society that knows what it's doing. So when I ask about what am I doing, that's the point. How are we going to recreate the idea that we have meaning in our lives together? How are we going to create a future that is just and have the kind of freedom that Americans have always promised ourselves? And if we do that, it's not just going to happen. We're going to have to do it by showing up and working. And that is going to make this country different from the way it is now. And that is actually what I think Americans want to do and need to hear and need to organize around. And that's why I'm doing this.
Well, Tom Steyer.
Well, Manny.
Our time is over. I just want to say thank you so much for taking this step, because it does take a ton of courage to do what you're doing. You are putting yourself out on the national stage and the international stage. There are going to be a lot of people with questions. There's going to be a lot more cameras. Thank you for spending time with us here in San Francisco, for looking into the eyes of your community and your family, and for helping launch your campaign here. We're proud of you, and I just want to say good luck. We'll be watching you.
So, you guys, let me say that my staff will tar and feather me if I don't ask you to go to tomsteyer.com and give $1 so I can deliver this message on the stage in September. We really need those donations. We need numbers of people, not numbers of dollars. But I'd ask each of you to go to tomsteyer.com so we can go and take back this country. That's what we're trying to do.
So a couple quick housekeeping things. One, Tom does have a couple minutes to come say hello to folks, so thank you very much for that, Tom. A couple upcoming events. We are watching the debates here next week. We have 2 large debate watch parties. Is it next week or is it in 2 weeks? The week after next. July 29th, we have a double hitter. We have the youngest black woman in Congress, Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, followed by Congressman Ro Khanna. On one night, Kara Swisher will be interviewing both of those. And I want to just put out there, because we're doing this at all of our events, we are doing a day of action on August 4th for migrant families. So we have a full day of events from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. where all of the money that we're raising is going directly into the hands of migrant families living in the Bay Area who are suffering at the crisis at the border. These are folks who are having trouble buying backpacks for their kids. We're working with Karasen and La Raza Community Resource Center across the street to coordinate for this day of action. So please support us on August 4th. If you liked, clap for that. That's amazing. We're really proud to be doing it. If you appreciated tonight's conversation and you want San Francisco to have high-quality civic programming into the future, please consider becoming a sponsor of Manny's. It is how we are able to do this. And to all the sponsors in the room, I really want to thank you so much. The way we're able to create socioeconomically diverse audiences and have this programming accessible to everyone is through our sponsors. So thank you for doing that. And the last thing is, if you enjoyed tonight's conversation, please tag us at Welcome to Manny's. Please tag Tom Steyer. What's Tom Steyer's Instagram? Is it just Tom Steyer? Just Tom Steyer. Easy. And do donate $1 to tomsteyer.com so we could see you on the debate stage, all right? Thanks, everyone. Good night.